ध्यायेत् शारदचन्द्रसुन्दरमुखम् ताम्रारविन्देक्षणम् भक्ताभीष्टवराभयप्रदकरम् कौपीनमात्रोज्ज्वलम् स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्याङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणीश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनध्यासितं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरं ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणीश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहमहमिति साक्षातात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वतामज्जतव पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम्। Namo Ramana. We will commence the Friday Atma Vichara by listening to Bhagavan's Upadesham. We have been, as usual, reading from the book Self-Enquiry. Ramana Answers Self-Enquiry 1900 to 1950, a compilation of all the questions and answers on the subject matter of self-enquiry by our founder, President Sri A.R. Natarajanji. After this, we will, after reading the question and answer, with the grace of Master, we will meditate upon that and then have an Atma Vichara session for 20 minutes. Then following which, Akka will talk on Atma Vichara from Ramana Gita, which she has been doing for the last few weeks. And in the series of questions that we have been looking into, we have reached question number 60. The devotee asks this to Bhagavan. Bhagavan has said that seeking the source of the mind will be an easy and direct path. He has also suggested the who am I inquiry. I wish to follow this path and I seek Bhagavan's grace to help me. I will repeat the question. Bhagavan has said that seeking the source of the mind will be an easy and direct path. He has also suggested the who am I inquiry. I wish to follow this path and I seek Bhagavan's grace to help me. Bhagavan replies, yes, self-enquiry is the most simple and direct one. It helps you to know the natural state which is devoid of the ego. Whenever any distracting thought occurs, question to whom that thought has arisen. It will be for me. Then who am I? Instead of allowing thoughts to spring forth, search for their source. Go inwards and cut the root. It is the effective way. I repeat Bhagavan's suggestion or Bhagavan explaining how the Atma Vichara has to be done and what it does for us. I repeat Bhagavan's answer here. Yes, self-inquiry is the most simple and direct one. It helps you to know the natural state, which is devoid of the ego. Whenever any distracting thought occurs, question to whom that thought has arisen. It will be for me. Then who am I? Instead of allowing thoughts to spring forth, search for their source. Go inwards and cut the root. It is the effective way. Bhagavan here is very clearly saying two things. One is obviously the path, how to do the Atma Vichara. The other thing is what happens by Atma Vichara. He says it helps us to know the natural state. First, he makes it very clear. This Atma Vichara makes us know the natural state, which is very important for us who have come here in the Satsangh, because it is for that natural state, to know more about the natural state, that we are having the Satsangh. And we do read books, we do interact in spiritual, take part in spiritual discussions. But Bhagavan is saying that the one who does self-inquiry will know it naturally about his natural state. It is very important that we recognize this. So, as Bhagavan says, Tane tattvam idavan Tane Katuva Arunachala in Arunachala Aksharamanamalai. He says that the self itself reveals about it. So Bhagavan is saying the self-inquiry is the most simple and direct path, because it will reveal its own state to the it will reveal its own natural state to the person who does the Atma Vichara. And what is that natural state? He says that state is devoid of the ego. There is no concept of individuality in that state. There is no limitation in that state. There is no entity which divides in that state. That is why it is the most natural, and that is the natural state of all of us, Bhagavan is saying here, and that gets revealed to us. So for that, he gives us the path. He says, whenever the distracting, this individualizing thought, or a thought of division, or any thought basically occurs, whenever any distracting thought occurs, question to whom that thought has arisen. All we need to do is inquire to whom is this thought. And it will be for me. It will be very clear that thought has not arisen for anybody. It has arisen only for me. When we inquire any thought, if we don't inquire a thought, what would happen? We will simply persuade the thought. However the thought goes, it becomes one, becomes two. It can be a series of thought. If we don't inquire, we simply get carried away by the thought. Therefore, Bhagavan is saying here, any thought which comes, we should simply inquire to whom has it come. And it will become clear it is for me. Then Bhagavan says, then ask the question, who am I? If it is for me, who am I then? Then what happens is, instead of allowing thoughts to spring forth, search for its source. And so instead of now the attention going behind the thought and going further with the thought, is turned and looked at the source. If it is for me, then who am I? It is looked for the source from which this I or this thought has arisen. When we go inwards and when we cut the root, by repeatedly doing that, it becomes very clear that it is it is because of thought, because of the individual idea, that this whole stream of thoughts is continuously running within us, and there is nothing much that one gains in persuading this thought. One is always in distraction. I was just talking to my friend today and I said, if you want to have an ice cream, we have to shell out some money. Like that, everything here, it's a give and take policy that happens in this world. And therefore we see that, and everything is transitory. As Leela Madam was saying, this corona time will also pass. Everything is transitory. Everything is coming and going. And therefore, it is very, very important that we get to the root. We get to the root by cutting the individual to whom these thoughts are all occurring. Who is believing that he is in this world? Who is believing that he has a body? Who is believing that he has an identity? That ego entity, which is there, which is very, very real for us, we need to go to that, remove that entity by going to the source. When we go to the source, then we see there is no ego, there is no individual concept, there is no attraction to certain thing, there is no aversion to certain thing, there is absolutely no duality, there is only that being, consciousness, and peace. And no matter what happens in this universe, it is never touched and it will never be touched. So when we see that source of ours, which is our natural state, as Bhagavan says here, it becomes, we get to know that that is the state I need to be. If I come out of it, I am going to be getting into these ups and downs, which is going to be inevitable. In this transaction world, there will be transactions if I move away from that self. So my own desire for anything other than the self, my own desire for anything other than the self puts me into a transaction mode. It puts me into something that I have to deal with. Whereas if I remain in that state of self, which is my natural state, which is totally devoid of this ego, this individual idea, which is totally devoid of all that we have experienced, aversion, distractions, and all of that, which is totally devoid of everything here and now. If we understand that that is my natural state and that is the best state for me to be, so that I am always at peace, I am always at that state of happiness. When it hits us, when we register that, then we start to use Atma Vichara to transcend a thought, if there is a thought, and we also make it a point to remain steadfast, abide in the self, which is what Bhagavan says in Atma Vichara that we should do. Atmanishtata eva swatma darshanam. If you only abide as the self, that is the real vision of the self. It is not a sporadic experience we may have. That is good, but Bhagavan is very clear that we should remain in our own state of self, that is the real Atma Darshana. So Bhagavan says, if we do that, this is the most effective way to be. And he has blessed through this answer to all of us that the Atma Vichara is the direct, simple path which will introduce our natural state to ourselves by removing all the distractive thoughts and taking us to the root, to the source, and even cutting the ego away. The ego entity is removed and makes us be one with the natural state. With the immense grace of Bhagavan, with which alone that we could have come to this direct path, with which alone we can comprehend this natural state, with which alone we can do this Atma Vichara effectively. And with that immense grace of Bhagavan, For the next 20 minutes, let us do Atma Vichara. Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. Namo Ramana. Over to Sharda Akka.
Namo Ramana. Illustrations to Ramana shining as the self in all beings. By the immense grace of the self manifest as Ramana, we have been practicing his glorious path of self-inquiry, revealed to us by his grace through his answers to various questions right from 1900 to 1950 when he dropped the body, and his continuous answers from within each one of us as we turn to him in self-inquiry and surrender. Bhagavan keeps coming to us in different forms. He comes to us and he always reveals what is the right answer for us to our doubt at that point in our seeking. Today, Bhagavan gave the simple answer of going to the source of every thought. He explained self-inquiry as he has done on many occasions as going to the source of every thought by asking for whom is the thought, and then going to the source of the thinker by asking who am I. We have been meditating upon the verses in the Ramana Gita by Bhagavan's infinite grace, and there Bhagavan has answered Ganapati Muni's question as to whether it is enough to have discrimination between the real and the unreal in order to be free from all bondage. And Bhagavan had answered, Mochayet sakalan bandhan atmanishtaiva kevalam satya satya vivekam tu prahur vairagya sadhanam. He has said that satya satya viveka, the discrimination between the real and the unreal, will lead to vairagya. And how does this apply in our practice of self-inquiry? We see that Bhagavan has told us in the 40 verses on reality, he has told us that when we look upon the world, we recognize that it is not real because it is dependent on the mind which perceives it. We looked into the definition of real and unreal, and we found that the definition is that that which is real has to be continuous, unbroken, unchanging, and it should be independent of all else, not a dependent truth, not a relative truth. And what is this world? The world is constantly changing. The world is available at certain times and not available at certain times. The waking world disappears in dream. The dream world disappears in deep sleep and in waking. So the worlds which we are experiencing are constantly disappearing. They are changing. They are anitya. Also, more importantly, Bhagavan points out that they are dependent on the perceiver, on the mind. So when we look at the world and the mind, in the Sanskrit, in Tamil, Ulagu Arivu Ondrai Udittu Odungumeno Ulaharivu Tannal Odungum. In Sanskrit, Dhiya Sabodeti Dhiya Astameti Lokastato Dhi Pravibhasya Yeshaha. The world is lighted by the mind, Bhagavan says. Ulagu Arivu Tannal Odungum. Although it looks like when we wake up, the world also rises along with us. But it's only because we have woken up that we can see the world, that we become aware of the world. If we were continuing to sleep, if we were continuing to dream also, the waking world would be as good as non-existent for us. So Bhagavan points out to us that the perceived world is dependent on the perceiver. So if we look at Satya, Asatya, the world becomes Asatya to the Satya of the mind. The mind is Satya in relation to the world. The mind is more real to us than the world. It is because of the reality of the mind that the world becomes real. So therefore the world is a dependent reality. It has no independent existence apart from our perception of it. So the world is unreal, asatya, and mind becomes satya. Then if we look at examine the satya or the reality of the mind, what do we find? Bhagavan says, Manasam tu kim. Find out what is this mind. When we search for what is the mind, what do we find? If we start examining the nature of the mind, we find the mind is nothing but thoughts. It is only thoughts rising, subsiding, rising, subsiding, rising, subsiding, one after the other, so fast that it looks as if it's a running film, a movie, a very fast movie. A fast stream, it looks like, something moving so fast. But actually, it's like one thought after another. And Bhagavan again says that Endangale manam yavinum naninum enname moolamam. As he answered in the question answers which Dilip read out today, he says that if we ask for whom is this thought, whose thought is it? The answer will obviously come, it is my thought, my experience, my perception, my thought. All experiences, all perceptions are only thoughts. So it is my thought. It is dependent on the I thought. So when we take the reality of the thoughts vis-a-vis the reality of the I thought, we find that thoughts are rising and subsiding, thoughts are changing all the time. So obviously they are asatya, they are unreal. Besides, thoughts are completely dependent on the thinker. They are relative to the presence and attention of the thinker. It's only when I pay attention to some object that that object becomes a thought in my mind, in my perception. Therefore, it is completely dependent on my attention to it. It is neither permanent nor independent, therefore it is asatya. We may do the viveka, satya, satya, viveka like this. We may say that, oh, the I thought is permanent, that is satya, that is satya. Then when we question who am I, or when we ask ourselves, is this I thought permanent? Well, it seems to be permanent in the waking sleep state, and it continues, no doubt, in the dream state. But what happens to it in the deep sleep? When we take the inquiry deeper, this I, then that question starts, who am I? Who am I? Who is this I? Who is this I? Is it the I thought? Am I the I thought? Which is there during waking, which is there in dream, but which again disappears in deep sleep. But I do not disappear in deep sleep. So who am I? When we try to seek out the satya of the I, then what happens? That the truth becomes evident of its own accord. Having cast aside all this, and all this gives us vairagya, says Bhagavan. Because when will we really start seeking the true knowledge about who I am? It is only when we recognize that the rest of it, everything apart from the I, is unreal. It is ever changing, it is transient, it never continues, and it is merely a dependent reality. It is not independent, it is dependent totally on what we see, what we experience. When we realize that, the importance that we give to the world, the importance that we give to our thoughts and experiences will start waning. And unless it wanes, why would we turn back to the truth? Why are we not experiencing our own natural state? It is because of the significance that we are giving to the thoughts, to all our experiences, and to the world thereafter, which we think we're experiencing. It is because of the significance that we give to this that we are not ready to completely turn our attention totally, fully, without any sense of distraction back to the self. Our tendency to give importance to something that is outside pushes the mind out again and again onto objects, onto the world, onto the thoughts. That's why we come out. So the more we recognize that this is not the truth, the less we will be attracted by the world outside and the world within in the form of thoughts. And when we are no longer attracted to the thoughts, when we have recognized, be it even by discrimination, that all these thoughts they are merely an appearance, they are merely insentient. Tat jadam hi asat, Bhagavan says in Upadesha Saram, Vigraha Indriya Prana Dhitaha, all are insentient. So the question will arise, what is the truth? What is the truth? What is the real truth? And that question will lead us to who am I? But when we start practice with who am I, we don't have to negate the reality of the world. We don't have to negate the reality of the thoughts. We don't have to negate anything else. We can directly go into the question, who am I? That is holding on to the core truth. That is actually having completed the Satya Viveka, having got the Vairagya to understand that the I thought is at the core of our existence and that the I thought itself is not our true nature because it is also a relative entity. The I thought is there only so long as other experiences are there and it disappears in deep sleep. Therefore, it is not the Satya either. So, what is the Satya? What is the truth of my own true nature? If I want to know the truth of my own true nature, the question, who am I, becomes a support every time I tend to get lost in that which is untrue. It becomes a bell, a reminder, which says, oh, you are getting caught in the false realms. What is the truth of your own nature? You do not know the truth of your own nature and you want to be busy thinking of something else and saying, I feel, I experience, I this, I that. How is it possible when you do not know who you are? The question, who am I, brings back this very subtle Satya Viveka to our minds and takes the mind back to the source again and again until it will firmly abide over there, says Bhagavan. Once it is firmly abiding over there, then there is nothing, there is no inside, there is no outside, there is no Satya, no Asatya. That's what Bhagavan says. He says, Na asatyam chintayet vishwam navasvasya tad anyatam. The jnani who is kevalam atmani, always established in the self alone, sada tishtati, gambhiro, jnani, kevalam atmani, the self alone, the jnani is ever abiding. Na asatyam chintayet vishwam. Such a one does not think of the world as unreal. Such a one does not say the body is unreal. Such a one does not say the thoughts are unreal. Such a one does not say anything is unreal. Vishwam is what? Vishwam is any object which is perceived is the world. That's why the world can be outside or the world can be inside also in the form of thoughts. But that world also, which we now discriminate between in self-inquiry, we say these are thoughts, they are not the reality, they are not my reality. Who am I? So we make this discrimination, we make the Satya, Satya Viveka in its highest form. Even that ceases, says Bhagavan, because there is no world apart from the self. There is nothing apart from the self. Na asatyam chintayet vishwam nava swasya tadanyatam. Swasya tadanyatam. From oneself, one does not see, the jnani does not see anything apart from the self. When there is nothing apart from the self, what is to be called unreal? And what is to be called real? So Bhagavan says this happens during the practice. We practice self-inquiry, the highest form of Satya, Satya Viveka. We practice it and we turn back to the self with the question, who am I? And once one abides over there, then there is no question of anything being unreal or real. There is no duality whatsoever. And Bhagavan also points out very sweetly in Ramana Gita, in answer to the second question, to that thought which was touched upon in his answer in today's question answer, which was read out at the beginning of the session, where Bhagavan says that the natural state is touched by self-inquiry. The natural state. And that Bhagavan gives us in the answer to the second question. In the second question, Ganapati Muni had asked, is it possible, Kimalam Shastra Charchaiva Jijnasunam Vimuktaye? Is it possible to abide or to become free by merely meditating upon these scriptures? Na samsiddhir vijitnyaso kevalam shastra charchaya. By merely discussing the Shastra, by merely talking about the teachings of Bhagavan, na samsiddhir, it does not lead to experience of the truth, says Bhagavan. Upasanam vina siddhir naiva syat. Without upasana, without practice, without abidance, without the practice of abidance, upasana means sitting close. Without sitting close to the self, without the practice of abidance in the self, upasanam vina siddhir naiva syat. The siddhi of self-abidance will not happen. Iti nirnaya. This is conclusion, conclusive. This is the nirnaya I am giving you. Because nirnayaptaye Muni had asked. I am telling you, unless you get back to the self, any amount of discussion about the truth will not lead you to the Atmanubhava. And then Bhagavan goes on to clarify. He says, Upasanam vina siddhir naiva syat iti nirnayaha abhyasakale sahajam sthiti prahur upasanam. What is this upasana? What is the upasana? What is the practice? He says experience of the natural state during practice is called upasana. Abhyasa kale sahajam sthiti. Prahurupasanam siddhim sthiram yada gacche saiva jnanam tadochyate. If the siddhi becomes sthira, if the experience becomes sthira, then it is called jnana. Bhagavan says in the path of self-inquiry, even during abhyasa kale, even during practice, what does one experience? Abhyasa kale sahajam sthitim. What one experiences is a natural state. One cannot experience anything else. That is what Bhagavan is telling us here. When one dips in through self-inquiry, through who am I, one experiences the natural state. But it is intermittent. It is called upasana because of that. It is not something different that we are experiencing. If we are having visions and other things, if we are having an objective knowledge, Bhagavan does not call that upasana. Bhagavan says that if you are experiencing the natural state, that can be called the practice. So we must experience a natural state. And Bhagavan says this natural state is experienced when we ask ourselves a question, who am I? But what happens? The difference is only that it is fleeting, says Bhagavan. It comes and goes. The sahaja sthiti comes and goes. And one must not mistake it for jnana. If one has an experience of the sahaja sthiti during upasana, one must understand, oh, this is upasana. This is abhyasa. I am practicing. The state is being experienced by me, but it is going away. Once it becomes steady, the same thing, not something different. And that is the beauty. Bhagavan says, in the vichara, it's something so amazing that Bhagavan tells us that we are touching that same state in which the jnani is abiding in the vichara. Isn't it something so gracious of him to say that you are also experiencing the same thing. You are not experiencing something different. You are also getting back to the same natural truth because it is natural. Sahajam sthiti. Abhyasa kale sahajam sthiti. So when one asks oneself, who am I? And the mind dips into its source. And repeatedly when one keeps on doing this, because the mind is again moving out, one has to keep on doing it. One has to recall maybe that Satya Viveka, which is actually encapsulated by Bhagavan in the vichara by making us ask, who am I? What is the truth of my own nature? What is the ultimate truth of my own nature? Because if I do not know the truth of my own nature, what else can I say that I know? Tannai aridalindri pinnai edarihilan, he says in his Atma Vichara, in Atma Vidya Kirtanam. Atma Vidya Kirtanam, he says, Tannai arindidir pinnai edarihilan. Once you know the self, everything is known. So Bhagavan, in his compassion, has given us in his overflowing grace, as Muruganatha Swami says, being an udari, being a spendthrift, he has given us this path of self-inquiry by which we can right away dip into this self, even for a second, minuscule second maybe, when we have asked ourselves, who am I? It may be just for such a second that even we don't realize that there has been a silence. But it is there if we ask ourselves. Even once if we ask ourselves the question, who am I? With all earnestness, if we turn within and say, actually everything that I have taken to be myself is not the truth. It is so obvious it is not the truth. Then who am I? When one asks oneself this with that longing, with that earnestness to know who I am, then in that very second, in that very moment, the Sahajang Sthiti is experienced, says Bhagavan. But it is still practice, so one has to keep going back, and that too happens by His grace, because He has brought us to His feet, He has brought us to this path, He has made us come back every time we go out, come back to the question, who am I? Come back to the self through the question, who am I? Every time the mind goes out. Maybe it has gone out for a minute, maybe it has gone out for a few minutes, for a few hours, sometimes for days it might have got caught in this unreal mechanization of its own making, the illusory working of the mind. But He pulls us back, and again we realize the extraordinary beauty of the self. No doubt the world still has its halo, but the grace ensures that slowly and steadily, Payyavum Veedu Kattine, as he says in Aksharamanmale, slowly and steadily, the magnificence of the self, of our own kingdom, of our own true state, is revealed to us by that extraordinary grace of Bhagavan. Om Namo Bhagavate Vishnu.
Akka, there were some questions.
Oh, I see. Yes. I cannot read them here. Will you take the questions or will you read them out at least?
No, it's some statement from Mr. Chidu Gowda. He says, Namo Ramana, thank you for your wonderful blessed talks. I am excited to know more about Ramana's messages.
So, thank you, Mr. Chidananda Gowda. Messages are being dwelt upon. You will certainly come to know more about them. Do be with us for all the satsangs, and I'm sure that you will be able to get the in-depth knowledge, and Bhagavan himself will reveal it. From moment to moment, he reveals in the path of every seeker. He himself comes and reveals his teaching in the best possible manner. And at one level, we are able to share it at the satsang. But when we share it also, it is from within you, Bhagavan will shine and give you the awareness or understanding within you of the words that are being spoken in the satsang, and that awareness and understanding within you, which is best for you, He will reveal from moment to moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Akka. Say the prayer?
Yes.
Apara Satchit Sukhavarirashi Yasyormimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Ramanam Gabhiram Chinta Vihinam Hridi Chintayami Chinta Vihinam Hridi Chintayami. Namo Ramana. Thank you all.
Namo Ramana. Thank you.
Ramana.